You're listening to the Digital Deep Dive, where we tackle the newest trends, strategies, and pain points shaping growth across the digital landscape. From Amazon and D2C to international expansion, join our host and e-commerce leaders across multiple industries for in-depth discussions on how to maximize your brands in the digital arena. Now, here's your host, Aaron Conant.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Digital Deep Dive podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Conant, and today we're gonna kind of tackle e-commerce predictions for 2023. So something I'm excited to cover, but also excited because I got an old friend, John Ghiorso, SVP of e-commerce over at Media.Monks. But as I've known him for a long time, founder over at Orca Pacific for the longtime listeners here and members of the network. An overall thought leader and great friend. So, John, I'll kick it over to you if you want to do a brief intro on yourself and Media.Monks now. And if I say Orca Pacific throughout the podcast, it's just a throwback to the good old times.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, so I guess long story short, I founded a company called Orca Pacific over 10 years ago. Historically, we've been a full service Amazon agency, but over the last several years, in addition to merging with Media.Monks about 2.5 years ago, we've expanded it out into what we're calling e-commerce platforms, or platform commerce, I guess is our name for it. So basically, think top 10 e-commerce platforms in the US and globally. In the US, Target, Walmart, Amazon, et cetera, go down the list, and some of those as well globally, but also the kind of domestic players in different countries and regions. And we offer really kind of a full service suite, advertising, content, strategy, operations, et cetera. We work with some of the largest consumer product brands in the world: CPG, consumer electronics, furniture, kind of go down the list, as well as a number of mid-market brands, venture-backed brands, kind of the digital native disruptor brands that I'm sure some of you know. So that's kind of the quick pitch on who I am and what we do. And, I kind of run that whole thing for Media.Monks. If folks are not familiar, Media.Monks is at this point about a 9,000 person strong global marketing services firm. Yeah, I think offices in about 40 countries, full kind of global capability across the digital marketing stack. So creative, search, social, really, go down the list. We probably have a capability that does it.
Crazy. I didn't know it was that many people. That's nuts.
Yeah.
So e-commerce predictions, we've always, chatted, I love where you sit in this space, right? I don't want to say futurist, but almost what's coming, what's right around the corner that people should be thinking about and prepping for. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts in this e-commerce predictions. What do you see coming in 2023? And, along the way, feel free to kick stuff back my way too. But what do you see? Anything? Is it 5 bullet points? Is it 3 bullet points? How many are we going to go through here, do you think?
It could be a dozen, but I don't know if we want to go on, go that long. But I guess maybe I'll kind of start with one bucket that I think is probably the most, just from kind of gauging my conversations and interest, seems to be the most salient, which is retail media. Retail media is really started to hit its stride in North America last year, 2022, and is only going to accelerate this year in 2023. It's a few years behind in the rest of the world, but it's starting to become, in my opinion, inevitable that every regional, national retailer globally is going to have a retail media network. So almost every week, every month, you see a new announcement. So-and-so's launching one, so-and-so's launching one. I think that by the end of this year, maybe the end of next year, there will be very few holdouts left, meaning there are some things that you can predict and you can get wrong, and you're sort of taking an educated guess. The ubiquity of retail media networks for me is not really a prediction. It's an inevitability. And that inevitability is based on market forces. So I'll go into this in a little bit more detail and kind of explain that thinking. So
yeah, and really quick though, do you think that the US is just a little ahead just because, Amazon's dominance? It seems to me like they're the ones that kick this all off, right?
Yes.
On a digital scale massively. And then it starts to impact the media budgets with Walmart, Target, Walgreens, Ahold, Lidl. It doesn't matter who you are, Kroger. And they start seeing if they're not in, this money's just going to keep getting funneled to Amazon. And so is that why you think the US is just, a little bit further down the path? I don't want to say ahead, but just a little bit further down the path than, LATAM, EMEA, APAC.
I mostly agree with that. And there certainly is a competitive dynamic saying, hey, wait a minute, Amazon's getting these dollars. If we don't have something, Amazon's going to take all these dollars. That is true. And it's true that the reason it is further along in the US is because Amazon started this they invented the concept, right? This retail media did not exist before Amazon just invented it. Again, that was like 10 years ago. It didn't really pick up steam until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But what Amazon sort of uncovered, and I would say demonstrated, are two things. And I think every retailer now is understanding that this is just reality. Okay. You have to have an e-commerce business if you're a retailer, right? That's where all the gain is going. Brick and mortar retailers flat. It's been flat or virtually flat, up 1%, down 1%, whatever, but virtually flat for a decade. All of the growth in retail is happening in e-commerce. And that applies to the US, but it applies globally. What does that mean? It means if you're a retailer and you want to grow, and every business wants to grow, you have to have an e-commerce site. Even if you're a traditionally brick and mortar retailer, you got to have an e-commerce site because that's where all the growth is. Okay, fair. I don't think that's a controversial point. E-commerce is a pretty terrible business. It is very hard to make money. Even Amazon has a tough time making money, and everyone else doesn't have nearly the scale, maybe with the exception of a few of the Chinese e-commerce players. No one else has the scale that Amazon has. So you theoretically can make this a profitable business at scale. But now even Amazon, we're starting to see that, depending on how you define profit, right? Yes, it can be sort of a quasi-profitable business, but Amazon also continually sets this bar for delivery and service, which is more and more and more expensive. So to hit the bar that Amazon set without the scale that Amazon has, it's almost always a money-losing business or a very low margin business. Okay, so that's also, let's say, more or less a fact, and one that probably isn't going to change. Maybe if we have some fully autonomous, self-driving truck, drone future where the last mile becomes so cheap, that may change the dynamic. But forget about that for a second. E-commerce is a low margin business. Amazon discovered that there is another way to monetize an e-commerce business at scale in a very healthy margin way, and that is serving ads on your website and your app, et cetera, on your platform. So what's going to happen is you're now in a situation where their competitive dynamic is such that if Amazon and Walmart and Target, which they do, let's say, have retail media networks, and another major retailer, and I'm making this up, right? But another major retailer doesn't, they're basically in a situation where they're trying to compete on a completely unlevel playing field because their competitors now have a second revenue stream at very high margin that they're pumping into their business, which allows them to do all kinds of things, offer faster shipping, lower prices, better infrastructure, whatever it is, right? So again, that's when I say some things are just inevitable. This, because it's really truly based around market forces, retail media networks have become essentially table stakes and inevitable. And I will say not just for the major retailers that I mentioned. Now there are regional retailers launching retail media networks. If you have any scale at all on a website, you basically are forced into a position where you're going to have to monetize that traffic via advertising. And I'll take a breath there, but there's some other really interesting ramifications of that as well.
No, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, that's just the reality. And I think there were some, holdouts prior to the pandemic, right? And then there was a lot of inequities that were covered over, glanced over during the middle of the pandemic, from an inside capability side, just because everybody was online and you had to be, and people were turning a blind eye to all the things that need to be fixed and overall profit margin. But as we got to the end of this year, especially, I mean, going back to Amazon as a whole, especially if you were a vendor and they were cutting your weeks of cover from 14 weeks down to 3 to 4 weeks. And now, all of a sudden you're not getting, those orders you thought. That only emphasized this focus on profitability. And I think it's one of the top conversations I'm having right now is around profitability and how do you make e-commerce profitable? So, and advertising makes sense.
Well, and so this helps the retailer become more profitable. It certainly does not help the brand become more profitable. Arguably, another way to look at this is you're shifting the cost burden of a not very profitable business upstream to your suppliers, which is basically what's happening, right? So that isn't great news for brands and for suppliers, but it's also a situation now where you don't really get to complain about that because you just kind of have to do it and you have to make it work. Because again, it creates this competitive dynamic then with the brands where if you're not advertising and your competitors are, they're going to be taking share on these various platforms. There is one more, and I'll get into some of these predictions, which are kind of based around this overarching concept of this kind of inevitability within this retail media shift. There's one other interesting dynamic that I don't think we've seen really play out, but what I just described seems like kind of a no lose scenario for the retailer. Like, why not, right? We have to have an e-commerce business. It's fairly straightforward, to spin up a retail media network. You put ads on your site and you just have extra cash that comes in based on very little additional, cost. What I think the industry at large is forgetting is that if you don't do advertising the right way, or if you overdo it, or if you miscalibrate it, you can dramatically diminish the customer experience on your website, cable channel, whatever, right? Magazine, like this has been the case for 50 years, but the digital version of that is a website that becomes more cumbersome to use, less trustworthy, more annoying, filled with ads, et cetera. Amazon has made, in a way, this look easy because I think they've done a very good job of threading that needle of saying, how do we kind of maximize the revenue opportunity here while balancing that out with, maybe there's been some diminishment, but very little diminishment in the customer experience. So for them, it has been kind of an all upside scenario. But again, it really comes down to execution. So just something to keep an eye on. It is very possible to do this the wrong way and to actually cause more harm than good. And I think a lot of the retailers that are now jumping into this are doing it as somewhat of a haphazard, kind of trying to catch up mindset. Amazon built this thing for a decade and they argue, they tinkered with it for 5 years before they even rolled it out at scale because they were worried about this. You now have these other retailers that are just going, all right, we have 9 months, launch it, go. Right. And so there hasn't been reporting on this. There hasn't really been data on this yet. But so this is kind of a low confidence prediction because I don't know for sure if we'll see this happen this year. But I do think there's a possibility in the next year or two, you have retailers that inadvertently shoot themselves in the foot by overdoing a retail media network on their site. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then there's kind of a few different things that I can talk about within retail media. If you want to dive a little deeper, it's up to you.
Yeah, I do. I want to go a little bit deeper because retail media is a hot topic across the board. People trying to figure it out, but in kind of what you're saying around getting it wrong, the other part is brands are really, I don't know if we're coming out of the pandemic now. I don't know when we officially do, but during it, at the kickoff of the pandemic, money was just flowing into the digital side of the company and paid media. Then we got to the end of last year and they're like, it started about, maybe middle of last year, but, the CMOs, the CFOs started coming back like, where's the money going? Where's the money going? Like you're spending money in all these spots. What's the return?
Yeah.
Right. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And, Amazon does an okay job of kicking out, attribution for ad spend. And, whether it's tacos or ROAS or however you want to look at it, you're getting some data and at least something, you can get a bellwether on. But there's just a lot of pushback. Like, you have, as you're talking about, every, week, there's a new retail media network being launched and there's just no data on the back end. There's no attribution. It's just like a cash grab right now by the retailers as they try to figure it out. And that's just, I'm kind of playing off your point. Like Amazon took 5 years before they launched it. And now you have all these people just launching it and then asking for money. You have to give me money. You have to give me money. But then there's no attribution. And I don't know, it's not sitting real well with marketers, but they're trying to figure out what that looks like.
Yeah. And I do think the attribution component is going to catch up because again, I think what the retailers are going to realize is brands now have lots of options in terms of spending a retail media budget, a lot of different channels and ways to spend it. So if you're not going to offer robust, reliable attribution data, maybe with a few exceptions where you're just a top partner and you're just sort of forced to play the game, they're just going to find other places to spend that money. And especially in an economic downturn where there's more scrutiny, to your point, on marketing spend, I think these retailers are going to have to provide that if they're not already. That actually does kind of dovetail into one of my other predictions, which I think you're going to see. I've called this a unified real-time retail media strategy, kind of a jargony thing. But what I'm trying to kind of explain here is I think you're going to see more brands and agencies and brands working with agencies use kind of a unified retail media strategy that is more platform or channel agnostic to, instead of right now, I think most brands and most agencies even are set up in a way that they say, okay, here's our Amazon strategy and our Amazon budget. Here's our Walmart budget. Here's our Target budget, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe it gets signed off on per quarter for the whole year, whatever it is. And they go deploy that in those channels. I think what you're going to see here coming up is brands realizing that taking a more unified approach and being able to be more nimble within a overarching retail media strategy to move those dollars around where they make the most sense is going to ultimately create a better kind of cumulative ROI on the spend. Now this is a very technically difficult thing to do, which it seems maybe like, why wouldn't everyone do this? Or why isn't it being done now? Because it's technically hard. It's also hard from an operational and expertise perspective. You need a lot of cross-training, cross-functional teams have to work well together. You can't have marketing and sales and channel all siloed like you do in a lot of organizations. But if you can figure all that out, the ability to take, instead of saying we have all these channel budgets, we have a retail media budget, and then we have a series of KPIs that we try to normalize across channels and then chase those KPIs. So on a given day, what you're saying is we're trying to maximize ROAS across channel, which means we may be pulling budget out of Amazon and deploying it on Walmart today. And tomorrow we may be doing the opposite because we realize one of our top competitors is out of stock on Amazon. So we pull those dollars back from Walmart to Amazon for that day. And then boom, boom, boom. So a much more kind of dynamic, unified approach to spend. It's easier said than done, but I do think there's a lot of upside if that can be effectively deployed. So I think the more sophisticated brands are going to start restructuring internal teams to allow for that. And same on the agency side.
No, I think I totally agree. Like right now, there's a lot of chatter, a lot of brands I'm talking to, with that reduction in inventory that Amazon is taking. They're dialing back. Of a lot of people dialing back media spend on Amazon. They're worried they will go out of stock, right? The one thing you don't want to do is go out of stock.
Yep.
So they're dialing that back. And this kind of like, what do you do with the spend then? Right? Where does it go? And you can't just yank it and throw it anyplace else. I agree with you. That's next level for brands. When you get to the point where you're saying, I've got that pool, just like you outlined, who's doing the best today? What's my inventory levels there? What's my competitors' inventory levels there? What is my media spend? What am I overstocked on? How much do I think I can move? And what's the return?
Yeah.
If somebody comes up with a media platform that has a single dashboard, it's a $1 billion company. So
yeah. And I mean, one of the issues here is there is no sort of easy to use technical solution to this. Like, I know multiple SaaS companies are working on it. So to do this, you can have this kind of elegant concept and approach, but then underneath that, you've got to have multiple SaaS tools, operating together with human intervention then to tie them where the software isn't doing its thing, with, again, a lot of expertise and human intervention kind of, on the deployment side. So it's it's going to look like this very messy stitched together thing. I think eventually someone will come up with kind of a, much more elegant single solution. But again, much easier said than done to actually pull.
Right. It's just the integration to all the retail ad networks, right? It's what it is. I mean, the rest of it, you can get AI to go, scan the ASINs and plug it into your inventory and you get all that set up. But then like you were mentioning, everybody's launching a media network.
Yeah. And it's changing. It's an extremely dynamic situation. So again, in those situations, like, you just do need humans right now to like move and connect the pieces and maybe in the future, maybe not, but for today, for sure.
ChatGPT can do some really cool stuff, but not quite that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, eventually, right? Like, I'm not saying this won't happen eventually, where you may have a software that just sort of, you just feed in the KPIs and the budget and it just sort of does all the magic. I think there's certainly some software companies who like to claim that they can do that today, but there's a reason there's a lot of humans that are e-commerce retail media practitioners still, and are well paid and have lots of job opportunities. So and I don't see that changing, at least in the next couple of years. So,
what else do you see coming around the curve here for 2023?
Okay, so two things. One is creative differentiation, and the other is dynamic real world placements, which are two different things, but I'll just kind of name them and go through them. So on the creative differentiation side, I think this one's a little more straightforward, but Amazon in particular, but I would say other retail media platforms are becoming more and more competitive. They're becoming more and more commoditized. Product, the democratization of retail that Amazon kicked off and others have followed, which, just to define that, what I mean is basically anyone can sell on any platform at any time, right? There's no gatekeeper, there's no buyer, there's no saying we're only going to have the top 3 brands. That's created just an incredibly competitive dynamic, and the same applies on the retail media side. So I think what you're going to see happening, it's happening now, but I think you're going to see it accelerate, is more differentiation in terms of a retail media strategy that is based around creative, like actual creative assets that are made for retail media or even for a specific platform, which, you don't see that a lot. You do see it a little bit right now. But mostly what you see is if, Kraft, macaroni and cheese is on Amazon, the assets that you have are the assets that just get pulled out of the central repository the image of the product this way and this way and this way, and the kind of lifestyle shot of the, the zoomed in shot, et cetera, which is okay. Like those are high quality assets. It's okay. But what you're seeing Amazon lead the charge on is more kind of dynamic opportunities, especially with video, in terms of the ad units themselves. So you can now run, 15-second videos, 30-second videos in different ways in search, on Fire TV, et cetera. So as Amazon and the other platforms build out more opportunity for dynamic creative, you're going to have, I think, more brands naturally start to build more contextual creative, because that is going to have a very real impact on that ad's performance. There's also more scale, more dollars, more justification to build customized creative. Customized and platform contextual creative is also getting cheaper on kind of a per unit basis for a lot of different reasons. And, Media.Monks is leading the charge on that. There's certainly others doing it. So there's kind of this convergence of trends. And I see that the really savvy brands are not going to be the ones that just have the data side handled and the kind of, quantitative side, which you need to have handled, the technical side of retail media. They're going to start more and more to say, yeah, we have to still have that stuff handled, but can we pair that with real creativity, in the same way that you would for many other advertising, channels that have been around longer. If you're going to run an ad in GQ, to use kind of an analog example of this, right? Like you're going to do a photo shoot for that ad in GQ, most likely, or at least for, GQ and a few other magazines. You're doing a specific creative shoot for that. I think you're going to see that happen more and more now for e-commerce in general, and in particular retail media, because the ROI is so easy to tie back to non-differentiated versus differentiated creative.
Yeah, and I think it is not only different for the retail media side, but also by retail media network, right? There's the team over at Visit. They were just at the last full day event that we did. And, would you do that deep dive around how products perform, right? The Walmart customer is different than the Amazon, is actually different than the Target or the Kroger, the Best Buy, whoever it is. And they're looking for different things, and the product to be, a different, not just a different pack size, but maybe the package is open. Maybe it's not open. Maybe it's rotated at a 35 or a 45-degree angle. All of those things have a direct impact retailer by retailer. And so, no, from the retail media side, I love it. I don't.
Yeah. And then
you just had me thinking about that, because I know, the 5 pictures, 6 pictures, people are just now starting to alter by marketplace. The next one is the actual ads you're serving.
Yeah. Especially when you talk about video. I mean, where it's one thing to say, well, how many different angles can you have of a product, and you do some live stuff, like that's important and that can be differentiated. But when you get into video, that's now a whole, you've got 15 seconds or 5 seconds of video to catch someone's attention. Most of the time, what you see is the generic, this is our brand video, right? And it's like, that's just not what is going to hook a customer. And then you get into, do you use produced video, or do you use, influencer video? What plays better? It's just going to open up a whole world of opportunity. And I think the brands that that take the creative side more seriously are going to do better.
Man, it just gets harder and harder for digital marketers. That's what it does.
Oh yeah.
Just keeps getting harder. That's just, I was talking with some friends earlier today, just around, the feeling I'm getting from digital marketers right now is just like, I give up. Like,
well, especially in e-commerce, where you have a $50 million, let's say, business on Amazon, and you've got like 2 people running it in most cases. It's like, this is our e-commerce person, and then we have like a marketing person that sort of helps out, and then and maybe we have a retail media person or something. But like, it's like, everything I'm talking about is it is a lot more than 1.5 people to
great. But I'm talking to some brands, a bunch of them that are doing hundreds of millions on Amazon.
Yeah.
And they're like, the org's a disaster. There's three
Yeah.
people running the whole thing.
Yep.
And you're like,
Yep.
wait, what? It's like,
Sure.
yeah, there's three people. And we're just expected to grow year over year and vet all the vendors, find the newest tech, cycle through. Oh, by the way, the CEO met some young kid on a plane who's the next best thing. So we got to vet him out and try him. It's just like forget it, whatever.
Yeah.
Just 2023 will be what 2023 is, and then they're handed the whole Amazon account as well. It's super.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It is amazing that, especially once you get into enterprise, there are brands that have, let's say, a $200 million, $300 million Amazon business. There are some that literally have 3 people internally running that. And then there's others that have like a 50-person team.
Yeah.
And there's lots of reasons in history and in terms of prioritization, but I mean, the variability is mind blowing when you get inside these organizations in terms of the different ways that they're attempting to approach this. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's just funny because I don't know, in my predictions for 2023, I would not put in there's going to be a massive awakening on the correct digital organization to handle e-commerce. I just don't see it happening this year.
No, I don't think that'll happen this year. I think that's going to be a very slow progression with a huge amount, again, of, not to keep using this word, but variability between, the orgs that really have it pretty well kind of at least figured out structurally and how they want to approach it. And those that are, pretty far behind. There's just a huge, and I don't see that changing anytime soon.
The podcast, the episode just before this one was around the digital org, and that one's kind of blowing up right now because people are like, yes, but I think at some point in time, they're also just like, now I'm just depressed, right?
Yeah.
Like that's everything I always wanted, but I know I'm not going to get buy-in. So one of the points in there is executive education, educating upwards around what it should be.
Yeah.
But
I think that's super important. Yeah. Should we do my last prediction for retail media? Okay. So this one's a little bit more out there, and this may not really be a this year thing. This may be like a next couple year thing. I'm trying to find a concise way to explain this. Okay. So dynamic real life placements. So Amazon Go, just walk out. Go ahead.
No, here's what comes to mind. To remember Minority Report.
Yep. That's the example I was going to use.
Oh, it is?
Yep.
I've been like, from the first time I watched it, I was like, no way, that's going to happen sometime in the future. So that's what you're thinking. Okay. Anyway,
So actually it's a great, okay. So for hopefully folks have seen that are listening to it, but basically in short, the scene that that's being referenced here is Tom, and this is like a 20-year-old movie at this point. Tom Cruise is walking through a mall and there's all these screens everywhere and they're showing ads and they're saying, I forgot the character's name, but hey, hey, Jim. And they're like, clearly these ads are being custom targeted to him because they're scanning his eye as he walks by them and they know who he is. And then they're custom targeting ads. So I don't think that is going to happen because it's too invasive and it's too creepy. It is probably technically possible in the not too distant future. But I do think something close to that is going to happen, where you're going to start to have screens inside of physical retail stores that are using the cohort of customers in that store to determine what ads they're showing at a given time. So it won't be fully down to the person, but it will be, there are 118 people in this store. We think that they are more likely as a cohort to be interested in Stella, the beer, right? Because of who knows why, time of day, type of customer, whatever. So we're going to run a coupon for the next 45 minutes on a screen at the end of the aisle for Stella. And then 43 minutes later, the cohort in that store will have changed enough where they go, okay, switch that over to Bud Light for the next 20 minutes and see how that goes. The reason that will become possible, and it's not really possible now, but I think it will become possible in the next couple of years, is that you're going to have stores that are filled with sensors and cameras. The reason you're going to have those stores filled with sensors and cameras is to facilitate just walk out technology, which Amazon does in their Amazon Go store. For anyone who's been there, Amazon is now deploying that technology across fresh grocery stores, and they'll likely put it in all the Whole Food stores. There are also other very large companies working on very similar solutions that will partner with other major retailers. Walmart's working on some stuff internally. IBM is working on this. Microsoft's working on it. Different components of the hardware and the software, et cetera. So this is not just going to be an Amazon Go gimmicky thing. I do think this is kind of a big part of the future of physical retail that allows you to not have to deal with checking out, which is great. But the other really big side benefit is it gives you a fully kind of robust picture of the customer journey and the data in terms of what do they do in that store. Right now you just kind of know who checks out at what time and what they bought and what their zip code is and name because of a loyalty card. But in the future, you're going to know who that customer is, everything they've done in store, everything they've done digitally on the e-commerce site, huge amount of data following that person. And then again, that cohort, and you're going to be able to determine, just like you would in a digital environment, what type of ad is more likely to resonate with this cohort of customers, to the point where I do think we'll have pretty close to real time, store level dynamic advertising that is deployable, across who knows how many screens, whether it's by aisle, whether it's store wide, whatever. I mean, there's going to be lots of different versions of this. But I do think in the next couple of years, we're getting pretty close to the Minority Report version of this. Basically, another way to put this is everything you're seeing happen in retail media right now, which when we say retail media, we almost by definition mean something that happens purely digitally. You're going to have almost completely plugged into physical environments in terms of tracking and deployment. And it's going to be, physical retail is still 80%. Right. Of retail traffic. So, you've got the opportunity that you have with retail media, quote unquote, now times 5, if you can deploy this effectively across physical spaces. So, that one's a little further out there. It's probably not this year, but I do think it's going to happen. It's going to be wild. So,
without a doubt. And they'll charge for it, right? End caps, displays, aisle interrupters, whatever it'll be.
Oh yeah.
If in a little time, it's free. And then they'll show the immediate uptick, which they can, right? Hey, this is the time. And then here's the checkout 20 minutes later where you saw the bump. How much is that worth to you?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. It takes the age old trade spend and it ties, data and ROI and granularity to it. And it's going to make it a lot more valuable. And again, back to that kind of first comment I made, you're then going to be in a dynamic where, if one grocery store has this and the other doesn't, they're just going to have more, money coming in and we'll be able to more effectively compete. And again, it's going to be expensive for brands, but I think they're going to be forced into playing the game. So it's going to be really interesting to watch.
Man, anything else like top of mind? Any questions for me? I know I picked your brain for a while.
I think probably we should do a round 2 because I do have a whole other set of I
don't like to do 2-hour podcasts.
Yeah. We're not doing the Joe Rogan thing. No, I think I do have a whole separate series of crazy predictions that are outside of the retail media domain or kind of in the general e-commerce bucket. But no, Aaron, this was great. I appreciate you having me on.
No, always love having you on, my friend. And we'll do a round 2. It'll probably be a month out here. We got a few more lined up, but again, John, thanks so much for your time today. Always a pleasure chatting with you. And thanks everybody for tuning into this episode of the Digital Deep Dive. Everybody take care.